I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the boy staring back at me. But something inside me whispered, "This is who you were always meant to be." What happened next changed everything. My life, my identity, and the way the world saw me. I had no idea that one night alone in my room, with just makeup and a dress, would turn me from a hidden boy into a beauty queen, and make my story go viral. I still remember the first time I locked eyes with myself in the mirror and felt a spark of someone I didn't know yet. Someone I had always been, but had never dared to see. My reflection stared back, awkward, boyish, hesitant, and yet there was a whisper in the curve of my jaw, the slope of my cheek, something fragile and tender that didn't belong to the boy I thought I was. I had spent years burying that feeling under layers of normalcy, under the jokes, the teasing, the just be a guy reminders. But tonight, in the dim light of my bedroom, I felt it. The desire to step into a reflection that matched what I had always imagined. My hands trembled as they hovered over the makeup kit I had ordered weeks ago, each brush and palette a tiny rebellion, each tube of lipstick a secret promise. I thought, what if I ruin it? What if I see her and she's not real? Yet, even as fear clenched my chest, anticipation fluttered like a bird desperate to escape. The first stroke of foundation felt like painting over the past I never wanted. Every dab, every blend, felt like coaxing a hidden version of me to rise into the light. I had watched countless tutorials, studied countless faces, but nothing prepared me for the sensation of seeing my own features transform in real time, reshaping into a version that belonged entirely to me. There was awe, there was panic, there was exhilaration. I caught myself smiling nervously in the mirror, my heart thudding in my ears like a drumbeat that couldn't be silenced. Then came the eyes, the mascara, the eyeliner. A subtle wing, nothing dramatic yet, but enough to make the boy I had been hesitate. There she was, flickering behind my eyelids, waiting. With every blink, she became more real, more insistent, more impossible to ignore. I whispered her name in my mind. Dahlia. And somehow, saying it aloud made the air in my room feel heavier, richer, like the world outside could never know this secret blossoming in my hands. By the time I lifted the brush to the lipstick, my nerves had transformed into a strange, trembling courage. It was no longer just about trying on a look. It was about claiming something I had denied for years. I pressed the soft rose shade to my lips, and the mirror seemed to exhale. The reflection that looked back wasn't perfect, wasn't flawless, but it was alive. I couldn't stop staring. Who am I now? I thought. And more importantly, who do I dare to be tomorrow? The knock on the door startled me, a reminder of reality pressing in. My younger brother poked his head in, unaware, asking if I wanted to watch a movie. My heart raced, and for the first time, I realized that stepping into this new self wasn't just about what I saw, it was about the world seeing me. Would they laugh? Would they understand? I swallowed hard and nodded, trying to let my voice sound casual, though it came out a pitch higher than usual. And in that tiny exchange, I felt the first true flicker of courage that would carry me further than I had ever imagined. The movie played on, but I hardly noticed the screen. Every glance at my reflection in the darkened window was a jolt, a reminder that Dahlia was not a fleeting idea. She was slowly stepping into life. My fingers nervously traced the edge of my skirt, a soft, flowing fabric I had chosen carefully, something that felt like a whisper of elegance. It swayed with me as I moved, almost like it was alive, dancing with my heartbeat. I had bought it online, alone, late at night, and somehow the secret thrill of opening the package felt like unwrapping a small piece of myself that had been hidden for too long. But the thrill came tangled with fear. I thought about school, my friends, the teasing I'd endured for anything that hinted at difference. What if they see me like this? The thought made my chest tighten. And yet, beneath that fear, there was something else, an undeniable pulse of joy. I had imagined this night countless times, rehearsed every movement in my mind, but the reality was sharper, more intoxicating. The way the light caught my hair, the gentle fall of the skirt over my knees, the subtle shimmer of my eyeshadow, it was like stepping into a painting where I finally belonged. I leaned closer to the mirror, studying every detail, searching for flaws. And that's when I noticed it, a small freckle near my temple, something I had always overlooked, now framed like a jewel. It seemed to wink at me, a tiny approval. I laughed softly, a sound foreign yet natural, and realized I was no longer nervous. I was fascinated, captivated, entranced by this version of myself that had been waiting patiently, quietly, for the courage to emerge. Hours passed in a blur of adjusting, smoothing, perfecting. Every brushstroke, every careful tuck of hair felt like a dialogue with Dahlia. "Are you ready?" she seemed to ask. And I realized I was. Ready to see how she could move through the world. Ready to let the world glimpse the parts of me I had hidden for too long. When I finally stepped back from the mirror, something had shifted. My reflection wasn't just a face, a costume, a fleeting experiment. It was a presence. I tilted my head, testing the curve of my smile, the tilt of my hips, and I caught myself thinking, I could be her. I could really be her. And with that thought came a tremor of excitement so strong it made my hands shake. I had imagined this transformation as a private secret, a hidden indulgence. But now the idea of stepping outside, of existing in this form beyond the bedroom, sparked a heady mix of terror and exhilaration. I stayed frozen for a long moment, hands resting lightly on the dresser, heart thudding. And then morning came like a hesitant visitor, spilling pale light across my room. I had barely slept, my mind alive with anticipation and nerves that felt like 1,000 tiny wings beating in my chest. I kept replaying the mirror scene from last night, imagining how it would feel to leave the room, to face the world outside as Dahlia. My stomach twisted at the thought, fear tangled with a strange shimmering excitement. Could I really do this? Could I really be seen? I dressed carefully, every movement deliberate. The skirt I had picked, soft and flowing, hugged my waist just right. The blouse was delicate, lacy at the edges, and I couldn't stop running my fingers over it, feeling the smooth fabric whisper promises of confidence I wasn't sure I fully owned yet. My hair, curled the night before, fell around my shoulders in loose waves. I caught my reflection mid-step and froze, as though I were looking at a stranger with a familiar face. Dahlia was real. And for the first time, I wanted her to be. Breakfast was a quiet, tense affair. My brother chatted casually about school and plans for the day, completely unaware of the storm of emotions swirling within me. I smiled, nodded, and sipped my juice, my hands trembling slightly beneath the table. Every clink of the glass, every scrape of the spoon against the plate felt amplified, a reminder that the world was waiting outside, patient and unyielding. I was still hiding, still protecting the secret of Dahlia from everyone, but the urge to step beyond that veil was growing stronger by the minute. When I finally left the house, the air outside hit me differently than I expected. It wasn't just cold, it was sharp and alive, almost electrifying. Every step down the street felt like an audition, a test I hadn't trained for. People passed, oblivious, yet I felt their eyes on me in some invisible way, sensing the tension in my shoulders, the flutter of my pulse. My reflection in shop windows was mesmerizing. I saw Dahlia moving confidently, even if my mind quivered with doubt. "You belong here," I whispered to the reflection, trying to convince myself as much as her. By the time I reached the small park near my street, I had caught glimpses of myself in the water of the fountain, and each reflection made my pulse spike. There was joy there, yes, but also a gnawing fear. What if this happiness was only temporary? What if stepping fully into Dahlia meant losing the boy I had always been, or worse, disappointing everyone who knew me? I shook the thought away, focusing instead on the rhythm of my steps, the sway of my skirt, the soft curve of my smile. Dahlia was real, and for the first time, I allowed myself to hope she could exist outside my bedroom. I sat on a bench, hands folded neatly in my lap, and let the world continue around me. Children laughed nearby, dogs barked, and the wind tangled in my hair like a gentle applause. And I realized, almost with a shock, that I hadn't felt this alive in years. The boy I had been felt like a shadow behind me, distant but still part of the story. And yet, in that moment, Dahlia was everything I could see, touch, and feel, vivid, daring, and unmistakably real. Returning home was harder than leaving. The streets suddenly felt narrower, the faces sharper, as if the world had turned its gaze directly on me. Every step was a test, every glance a silent judgment I imagined but couldn't prove. My heart thumped against my ribs like it wanted to escape, yet there was a strange thrill in that vulnerability, a rush of daring I had never allowed myself to feel. Dahlia wasn't just a reflection anymore. She was moving through space, claiming it, and demanding that the world recognize her presence. Inside, the mirror in my bedroom became my confidant once again. I stood in front of it, hands tracing the familiar curves of my waist, the swell of my hair, the soft line of my jaw. I remembered the freckle near my temple, the tiny jewel I had noticed the night before, and I felt a wave of pride. Small, quiet, Private victories like this began to stitch themselves into a tapestry of self-acceptance. Every detail I noticed about myself, every smile I caught in the reflection, felt like a whispered affirmation. You are enough. You belong. But self-acceptance isn't linear, and doubt quickly crept back in. I thought of school, of friends who might never understand, of the whispers that could follow me down hallways. My stomach knotted, and I clenched my fists, silently willing courage into my bones. I reminded myself that this wasn't about them. This was about me. About Dahlia. About finally letting a part of myself breathe. The real challenge came that evening when my mom called me into the living room. Her expression was unreadable, a blend of curiosity and concern. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, heart hammering. I want to try something, I murmured, my voice catching. I took a hesitant step forward, feeling the skirt brush against my legs, feeling every inch of Dahlia's presence in my movements. My mom studied me silently for what felt like an eternity. Then she said something I hadn't expected. If this is who you are, then I want to see you be yourself. The words were simple, but they cracked open something inside me. Relief, gratitude, disbelief, all mingled into a single soaring emotion. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes, and I laughed softly, the sound raw and unguarded. For the first time, someone I loved was willing to witness Dahlia fully. Later, I sat in my room again, staring at the mirror, feeling the magnitude of what had just happened. Acceptance wasn't just a concept anymore. It was tangible. And yet, even as relief settled, the path ahead remained uncertain. There would be moments of fear, moments of rejection, moments when the world seemed too heavy. But I had tasted courage, had seen the possibility of being fully seen, and I couldn't unsee it. I touched my reflection gently, as if introducing myself properly for the first time. We'll do this together, I whispered. No matter what comes next. And in that quiet private vow, I felt a surge the next morning. I woke with a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. Today, I decided, would be the first day I tried being Dahlia outside my house, even if it was just a short walk down the block. My hands trembled as I smoothed my skirt and brushed through my hair, curling it just enough to frame my face. Each motion was deliberate, each breath a small act of courage. The mirror reflected a version of me that felt both thrillingly new and frighteningly exposed. I stepped outside, and the world hit me differently than before. The sunlight glinted on my hair, the breeze lifted the hem of my skirt, and I felt a strange electric sense of presence. People passed by, strangers mostly, some unaware, some glancing briefly, and I caught myself analyzing every look, twisting every expression into judgment or curiosity. But despite the nerves tightening my chest, there was a spark of pride, a recognition that I had never felt before. I was walking, existing, being Dahlia in the open air, and that alone was an accomplishment. At the corner store, I hesitated before entering, gripping the strap of my bag as if it were a lifeline. Inside, the fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows, highlighting every detail of my reflection in the glass cases. I caught myself smiling nervously at my own reflection again, the same mixture of fear and exhilaration from the night before. A cashier smiled politely, and for a moment, the world seemed normal, ordinary. I realized that being Dahlia wasn't about shocking anyone. It was about inhabiting a space that had always felt slightly out of reach and finally taking it. By the time I returned home, a small thrill of victory had settled in my chest. My mom gave me a nod from the couch, a quiet acknowledgement that meant more than words. You look good, she said simply, and I felt warmth spread through me. It was as if she had unlocked a tiny door to acceptance, and I could finally step through it with a little less fear. That evening, alone in my room, I stared at the mirror again. Dahlia had begun to feel like more than a persona. She was a part of me that had always existed, waiting for the courage to emerge. I traced the curve of my lips, the line of my jaw, the soft slope of my shoulders, and I realized I was beginning to recognize myself, not just as a reflection, but as someone real, someone alive, someone worth seeing. And yet, even in that moment of quiet triumph, doubt whispered again. What about school? Friends? People who don't understand? I pressed my hands to the mirror, drawing a silent line between fear and desire. We'll figure it out, I whispered to Dahlia, step by step, moment by moment. And in that soft promise, a new kind of courage began to bloom. A courage that didn't erase fear but moved forward in spite of it. School the next day felt like stepping into a storm with no shield. I had rehearsed everything in my mind, how I would walk, how I would speak, how I would hold myself. But nothing could prepare me for the reality of moving through crowded hallways, surrounded by whispers and curious eyes. My skirt swished softly as I walked, a small sound that seemed amplified in my own ears, each step a heartbeat of courage. Dahlia was here now, fully present, and the world could no longer ignore her. The first few glances I caught were neutral, passing, almost like the world hadn't noticed yet. But then came the side glances, the quiet double takes, the subtle shifts in posture that told me people were observing. Panic bubbled up, but I forced myself to focus on one foot in front of the other. We belong here. We can do this, I whispered to Dahlia, clinging to her presence as if it were a lifeline. Lunchtime was the real test. I sat at the edge of the cafeteria, scanning the room, feeling every pair of eyes like invisible hands pressing against my chest. A group of classmates approached, curiosity flickering in their expressions. I braced for teasing, for laughter, but instead, a few smiled politely, and one girl, someone I barely knew, gave a soft nod and said, "I like your outfit." Relief, sweet and almost shocking, washed through me. For the first time, acceptance felt possible, tiny and fragile, but real. Walking home, I let the tension in my shoulders ease just a fraction. The wind lifted my hair, and I felt Dahlia moving with me, swaying in rhythm with my heart. I had survived the world today, and though there had been fear, there had also been small victories, moments of connection and acknowledgement that made my chest swell with pride. I realized that the transformation wasn't just about appearance. It was about courage, presence, and claiming the space I had always hesitated to enter. That evening, I looked in the mirror and lingered on the reflection longer than usual. Dahlia smiled back, the small freckle near her temple catching the light like a star. I touched it gently, a silent pact with myself. We are here, we are real, and we will continue. There was still a long journey ahead, filled with uncertainty, challenges, and moments of doubt, but for the first time, I felt ready to meet it. Not as a boy hiding, but as Dahlia, alive and present. The following days brought a rhythm I hadn't expected. Each morning, I dressed carefully, applying makeup, curling my hair, smoothing my skirt, and with each deliberate motion, Dahlia emerged stronger, more confident. I began to notice small changes, not in my reflection alone, but in how I moved, how I carried myself, how the world responded. Even passing strangers on the street seemed to register me differently, offering polite smiles, brief nods, tiny acknowledgments that built into a fragile web of reassurance. But confidence was never permanent. One afternoon, a classmate, a boy I had known since middle school, paused in the hallway, eyebrows raised. His voice was light, teasing yet not cruel. "Is that really you?" My stomach knotted. My first instinct was to shrink, to retreat into the shadow of who I had been. But Dahlia refused to hide. I took a deep breath, lifted my chin, and simply nodded. The silence stretched, taut and uneasy, before he shrugged and moved on. Relief mingled with lingering anxiety, but in that moment, I realized something crucial. Being Dahlia meant facing the world unflinchingly, even when it questioned me. That evening, I sat by my window, tracing the outline of my reflection in the glass. The sky outside was bruised with twilight, and I felt a similar tension inside me. A mixture of uncertainty and wonder. I thought about how far I had come, how timid and secretive I had been just a week ago, and I marveled at the courage that had bloomed from fear. Dahlia wasn't just a disguise anymore. She was a living part of me, a presence that could exist fully in both the quiet of my room and the scrutiny of the outside world. The mirror became a kind of sanctuary. I began talking to Dahlia aloud, softly, quietly, as if practicing for a world that might not always understand. "We've made it this far," I whispered. "And we're only going further." Sometimes my voice cracked. Sometimes I laughed at the absurdity and exhilaration of it all. Each evening became a ritual of reflection, of acknowledgement, of affirming the courage that carried me through the day. One night, I caught sight of the freckle near my temple again, and this time it felt different. It wasn't just a mark on my skin, it was a symbol, a tiny emblem of resilience, a reminder that even the smallest details could carry meaning. I smiled, touching it lightly, and whispered, "We're doing this together." And for the first time I realized that the transformation wasn't just external. It was in every thought, every movement, every heartbeat that declared, unapologetically, I exist as Dahlia now. It was during a weekend outing with my mom that I truly felt the world begin to shift. We went to a small cafe, one I had visited countless times as a boy, but today, as Dahlia, everything felt different. The bell above the door jingled as we entered, and I felt my heart spike. Nervous, aware, alive. But my mom squeezed my hand gently, her silent support grounding me. The tables were scattered with familiar faces, and for a fleeting moment, panic whispered that they would all notice, judge, whisper. I focused on my posture instead. I straightened my shoulders, let my skirt fall naturally, and held my head high. The barista greeted us with a smile. Nothing more. My mother ordered for both of us, chatting easily, while I sipped my drink, feeling the rhythm of the cafe settle around me. Each glance at my reflection in the window confirmed it. Dahlia wasn't just a fleeting persona. She was present, confident, moving seamlessly through spaces that had once felt impossibly intimidating. But acceptance, even in small doses, never came without challenge. A young woman at the next table turned to look at me with curiosity. I caught her eyes in the reflection of the glass and felt that old familiar pang of fear, judgment, ridicule, rejection. Yet as our eyes met, I forced myself to smile. Not nervously, not hesitantly, but genuinely. And something remarkable happened. She smiled back, briefly, a recognition, a subtle acknowledgement that I belonged. The tension in my chest eased, replaced by a warmth that spread through me like sunlight breaking through clouds. On the way home, I reflected on how small moments like this were quietly monumental. Each smile, each polite glance, each neutral reaction was a step forward, a proof that Dahlia could exist outside my room, outside my imagination, in the living, breathing world. And as we walked, the wind lifting my hair, the sunlight catching the freckle near my temple, I felt a quiet pride swelling in my chest. Later, alone in my room, I sat in front of the mirror and traced my reflection with my fingers. I whispered softly, "See? You can do this. You've always been able to." And for the first time, it felt less like practice, less like an experiment, and more like life. Dahlia wasn't waiting for the world to accept her. She was learning to accept herself first, and in that quiet acceptance, the world suddenly felt less daunting, more navigable, and infinitely more alive. The following week brought something I hadn't anticipated. Attention. Not loud or dramatic, but subtle, persistent. Friends and classmates began noticing little things. The way I moved, the tone of my voice, the careful way I styled my hair. Some glanced, whispered, then looked away. Some smiled, curious but non-judgmental. Each reaction was a spark of tension and excitement, a reminder that stepping into Dahlia meant stepping into scrutiny. I felt my heart hammer at first, but slowly, I realized that attention could be a strange kind of validation. One afternoon, as I walked to class, a friend I had known for years hesitated, then called my name softly. "You look different. I mean really good." Relief and joy collided in my chest. I laughed nervously, nodding, unsure how to respond. But it was enough. That brief acknowledgement, the fact that someone had noticed and chosen kindness, made the world feel a little less intimidating. Each compliment, each neutral or supportive glance became a small anchor, pulling me further into the courage I had been cultivating. By the end of the week, I found myself experimenting more boldly. New hairstyles, a skirt with a pattern I had hesitated to try, subtle touches of makeup I had avoided before. Each choice felt like a conversation with Dahlia. Sometimes tentative, sometimes daring, but always authentic. I realized that transformation wasn't just about changing appearance. It was about exploring the layers of identity, courage, and self-expression that had always been waiting beneath the surface. Evenings remained sacred. I would sit by the mirror, gently speaking to Dahlia, reviewing the day's victories and challenges, tracing the small freckle near my temple as if it were a talisman. "You did well today," I whispered, and for the first time, it felt like I truly believed it. I began to understand that Dahlia wasn't just a reflection, a role, or a secret indulgence. She was a presence, a partner, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, she had begun to inhabit every aspect of my life. By the time the weekend arrived again, I realized that fear had started to lose its grip. It hadn't disappeared. No, it still lurked in the corners, waiting for a misstep, but courage was stronger now, intertwined with pride and joy. I felt ready to push further, to test the boundaries of what it meant to exist as Dahlia, and to embrace every tiny moment of discovery along the way. The real test came one Saturday morning when my mom suggested we visit the downtown market. Crowds, noise, unfamiliar faces. Everything that once would have sent my anxiety spiking now felt like an invitation. I dressed carefully, choosing a blouse that fluttered with movement and a skirt that felt playful yet elegant. Every brushstroke of makeup was deliberate, every curl of hair intentional. I looked in the mirror, tracing the freckle near my temple and whispered, "We're ready." Walking through the market was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. Stalls of fresh fruit, clothing, and trinkets blurred around me, the chatter of vendors blending with the hum of the crowd. People glanced, some more than once, and I felt that old pang of fear. Yet, each time I straightened my shoulders and smiled, I felt a surge of confidence. Dahlia was no longer just in my bedroom. She was moving boldly through the world. At one point, a small group of teenagers passed, and I caught their gaze. My heart raced, anticipation and dread in equal measure. But instead of ridicule, a girl offered a brief, genuine smile. Relief flooded me, and I found myself smiling back, unguarded, unapologetic. It was a tiny victory, but in that crowded, chaotic space, it felt monumental. We stopped at a cafe inside the market, and I realized just how much Dahlia had begun to shape my presence. Even my mom noticed. "You carry yourself differently," she said quietly. "You seem lighter." I laughed softly, realizing she was right. Confidence, once a fragile ember, was now flickering steadily within me. And for the first time, I understood that transformation wasn't just about makeup, clothes, or reflection. It was about owning every step, every glance, every heartbeat as authentically as possible. By the time we returned home, exhaustion mixed with exhilaration. I collapsed onto my bed, staring at the mirror once more. Dahlia smiled back, serene and radiant, and I felt the quiet pride that only comes after facing fear and choosing courage. "This is just the beginning," I whispered, touching my freckle gently. "We have so much further to go." And for the first time, it felt entirely possible. That Dahlia wasn't a fleeting secret, but a fully alive, breathing, unstoppable part of me. The days that followed were a delicate balance of exhilaration and vulnerability. I started to notice small, subtle ways the world responded to Dahlia differently. Friendly smiles, polite nods, casual glances that lingered just a fraction longer. Some reactions were supportive, some indifferent, and a few carried the faintest edge of judgment. But each experience was a lesson in resilience. Each moment reinforced that stepping fully into Dahlia meant embracing the full spectrum of human attention without shrinking away. At school, I began testing boundaries. I joined a small club, offering my voice, my ideas, and slowly I felt inclusion not as a boy pretending, but as Dahlia being seen. The first time a teacher addressed me by my chosen name, my chest tightened with a mixture of shock and joy. I caught a glimpse of myself in the classroom window and saw not just a reflection, but presence, commanding, soft, unmistakably authentic. The freckle near my temple caught the sunlight, a subtle beacon of everything I had overcome. Yet even with progress, self-doubt lingered like a shadow. Some nights, I would stare at the mirror, touching my face, and wonder if this was real or if it was fragile, a bubble that could burst with one careless word. But Dahlia had grown too strong for doubt to fully dominate. With each day, she spoke to me with quiet authority, reminding me, "You belong. You've always belonged." And gradually, those words began to stick, becoming as much a part of me as my heartbeat. The transformation had become more than external. It was internal, emotional, psychological. Notice subtle changes in the way I walked, the way I held my hands, the rhythm of my speech. Confidence and self-assurance weren't performances anymore. They were integrated, alive within me. And through it all, I began to realize something profound. Dahlia wasn't just a new identity. She was the truest version of me, waiting patiently until I had the courage to show the world who I really was. That night, alone in my room, I lingered by the mirror longer than usual. I traced the curves of my lips, the slope of my cheeks, the familiar freckle near my temple and whispered, "Look at how far we've come." And in the reflection, Dahlia smiled back. Not a borrowed persona, not a fleeting disguise, but a presence that had been alive all along, waiting for recognition, waiting to thrive. The morning of the weekend came with a strange, fluttering anticipation. Today, I decided, Dahlia would face the world fully. Not just glimpses, not just short walks or cautious interactions, but a full public presence. I dressed carefully, selecting a flowing dress that felt like it had been waiting for this very moment. My hair curled just so, makeup subtle but confident. I caught my reflection in the mirror, traced the freckle near my temple and whispered, "This is us. Ready." The streets felt alive as I walked. Children laughed in the distance, Vendors called out greetings, strangers passed by, each step reminding me of the courage that had carried me this far. I noticed people looking, not in judgment, not in ridicule, but in curiosity, recognition, and sometimes admiration. I held my head high, smiled softly, and let Dahlia move through the world as if she belonged. Because she did. At the park, I paused, letting the breeze lift my hair, letting the sunlight illuminate my face. I saw my reflection in the water of the fountain, and for the first time, there was no hesitation, no doubt. There was only presence. I wasn't performing. I wasn't hiding. I was fully, unapologetically me. And for the first time, I felt the full weight of what that meant. Freedom, authenticity, and an unstoppable sense of self. Later, back home, I stood in front of the mirror one last time for the day. I traced the familiar freckle near my temple, smiling at the symbol it had become. A small, shining reminder of courage, persistence, and transformation. We did it, I whispered softly. We made it. Dahlia's reflection smiled back, radiant, confident, and alive. And I realized that the journey wasn't about becoming someone new. It was about uncovering the person who had always been there, quietly waiting for the world to catch up. For the first time, I understood that transformation isn't just about changing how you look. It's about daring to exist fully, to claim every moment, and to let the world witness your truth. Dahlia wasn't a mask, a role, or an experiment. She was me, the part of me that had always existed, now alive, vibrant, unstoppable. And as I turned away from the mirror and stepped into the evening light, I felt something profound, a joy, a freedom, a certainty that I had never known before. I was no longer hiding. I was seen. I was Dahlia.